the Dataverse Summit. I've been following some previous sessions and they were absolutely wonderful. So today, my topic is Dataverse entities of project operations. And as you rightly said, that this space is for which is yet untamed, and whoever is looking to work on project operations as a customizer or as a configurator, we should present with a holistic view of how project operations Lite looks like. So that's what I'm going to bring today to the table from a techno-functional perspective, largely. So before we get into the session, actually, let me do a quick introduction about myself. Raz, you already kind of covered in the best words, but for others who don't know me, my name is Priyesh Wagh. I'm a Dynamics 365 solution architect and Microsoft Biz Apps MVP. I'm working with CloudFront's technologies in Mumbai. And that's my Twitter handle, Priyesh underscore WNGMAN7. And that's my blog, uh, D365 Demystified. So I try to post post regularly in terms of Power Platform and Dynamics 365 collectively. All right, so let's look at the topic. The topic is Dataverse entities of project operations Lite. So it is understood that most of you have been working in Dynamics 365 sales or CRM space since some time. And because we have all used to working with entities like account, contact, which are our common business entities, but something that we don't usually uh, look at is the project operations entities. So, since project operations is a new product, which previously was project service automation, uh, the Dataverse entity largely remain the same. There is no change as such, but there are a few changes in terms of how it looks, they appear, and that's what I'm going to bring to the table today. So let me get started. Let me focus on what we are going to present. I have listed out, or I have kind of created a flow of how the entities are related to each other, which is a parent entity, which is a child entity. If you are looking from a perspective of how project operations can be divided into the configuration part, the sales part, the project management aspect of it, the scheduling part, the time and billing, and the invoicing part. So all the major entities that we come across, I'm going to present today. I'm also presenting you a flow visually, and then I'm going to go back to my environment and just show where these things are located, so that by the end of the session you have a bird's eye view of what these entities look like. What am I looking at? What am I pointing to really when I go from quote to invoice? Sorry, quote to contract to invoice, and then so on. So all right, so let's start with the first thing. Of course, when you start project operations, let me highlight again that project operations, what I'm focusing is a light deployment, meaning project operations comes with three different types of deployments, and light deployment resembles largely what Dynamics 365 PSA was before, whereas the other full deployment of project operations involve having project operations in Dynamics 365 connect over to finance and operations in order to complete the invoicing process and realizing the revenue and everything in finance and operations system with inbuilt integrations like using the dual write orchestration. All right, so that's not something that I'll be covering today, but what we are looking at, what lies inside Dynamics 365 piece itself. All right. So again, whoever are configurators, whoever are customizers, whoever are looking to, whoever have started working on project operations and are looking to customize the system and not able to find what is on the UI and what it is behind the scenes, we're going to look at that. So starting with the first part, let's look at what are the common entities in the configuration aspect of things. Now, apart from what you see on my slides, there are a lot of entities that still exist and connect. But for you to get started with the bare minimum in order to go from a full cycle of from lead to opportunity to quote to contract to making projects to booking resources on those projects, to them making time entries, and then those time entries going all the way to the invoice. What are the major entities that come into picture, and what all major entities are touched upon? We'll be looking at that. So on the configuration level, of course, currency is the parent of the organization unit. So organization unit here is considered as the parent. All the configuration start from the organization unit piece. But of course, when we create an organization unit, the currency is the one that we select as a lookup of. So if I have to go to my Dynamics 365, I will just show what I'm talking about and also talk a little bit about the entity from a functional perspective, what that entity is. I'm just not going to talk about where the entity is, but I'm also going to talk about what does it mean. So organizational unit also means that geographically and legal entity wise, uh, wherever your service is, like whatever you're trying to do as a professional services firm, um, who's using project operations, the organization unit defines the level of entity or the business unit, right? So whenever, let's say this is my default business unit under which different business units based on different geographies can exist. But since this is I'm only demonstrating one, so organization unit is where all my configuration pieces started. And because I'm using my base as US dollar, so hence I had listed currency as the topmost, so that whenever I want to create an organization unit, everything that happens under it in terms of the financial aspect of it is considered in US dollars. Then if I just click on related, of course, there are several other entities as well tied to the organization unit. And as you go on progressing in project operations, you will find organization unit being a lookup everywhere else as well. But to start to configure a new project operations Lite instance, what is needed right away is what I had mentioned in the slide. So that you first of all go ahead and create your organization unit. If you have some sample data already, you can just start by manipulating that. So for my example, I'm keeping it CFPO3 default. And there, the most important child records for that are the price lists. So if I have to go back to my slides, um, I've created an organization unit, or rather I'm using an existing one, and then I'm tying a cost price list to it. So price list again is a price level ID entity. Those who are familiar with customizing Dynamics 365 from CRM from the past would know that price level is actually a price list. So if the entity says cost price list, so take a note that it is just it because a price list entity is used here. So cost price list is not an entity. The entity is just price list. So price list of context type cost, they are, you can start configuring them here. So whatever your costs are for the organization unit, you can tie the price list to this organization unit. Okay. Then what happens is in those price list, what else are you supposed to set? So you're supposed to set role prices, and the a logical name for that, sorry, the name for the entity name for that is msdyn underscore resource category price level. And I did already mention that there are other child entities, so we'll not be going into that. So let me go into this cost price list. So US cost rates is the cost type of price list, um, which I had created. And the role prices is another important child entity to the price list already, which I can list based on different units, different resourcing units as to what different roles are. So again, roles is an aspect of bookable resources, meaning what role a user does in the system, what could be their rates in different resource units. So that also I will be covering in a short while. But let's say if I have to select my default organization unit, I can see that I had defined two roles here, developer and solution architect. Let's assume for this scenario, I am a professional services firm. And for the main organization unit, that is the main business entity, I'm defining some rates already. So this is my cost price list, right? And this is what I'm tying to the organization unit. So let me go back. Yes. So right away, you had set these things which is the first step to start setting up a project operations Lite environment. And as we saw in the role prices, inside a price list, that we saw that there were some roles as well, right? So what is a role actually? So that is where resources part of configuration comes into picture, where resource role is here, which I will just get to in a bit. But let's first start by understanding what is a resources or bookable resources. So um, so this is the main entity, bookable resources. So in these business, in these organization unit, of course, you will be having users who will be working on projects in project operations, and those are called as bookable resource in a project operation. So the name for that is bookable resource, and it is a child of a user record. That's a system user record, or it could be a contact. So there are different types of bookable resources you can create. The only caveat here is that one system user can only be tied to one bookable resource. Although you have a lookup of user in bookable resource, but you can only have one user tied to it. If you try to create another bookable resource with the same name, that will fail, and you won't be able to create that. And again, what happens to the bookable resource? A calendar template is tied. So these three things I'll just show you right away. What I meant by that. So by that, I meant that let me start putting my resources into the system already. So if I go to the resource section in project operations, um, you can see there is type of contact. So this is some sample data which I already got with this setup, but you can create different types of bookable resources. You can create generic ones. It could be an equipment as well. It could be an account. You can mention a crew as one resource. You can list them and have some prices according to that. So here I'm just pointing to a user, because the reason I selected is user is because the user is the actual one who will be logging into the system, and they would see their own bookings and everything that comes along the way a little later on, right? So this is the bookable resource. Um, I've tied my CRM admin user to that because in the project operations trial that I've created, you only get one license for now. So I have tied this user, and what happens is you can then have time zone set to it. And when I said work hours, you can click on the show work hours, and there is a calendar template tied to it. So when I mentioned in my slides, what is a calendar template? So calendar template is a work hours template. So if you look at the entity list in entities in your default solution, the entity appears as work hour template, but at some places it is written as calendar templates, right? On a generic level. So a calendar template is applied to a bookable resource, right? So by this, what I mean is that what is the work schedule of this particular resource? So I can create a new working schedule or non-working schedule for this resource now on the projects. And I said that it should be a regular 9:30 to 5 p.m. Um, work schedule, right? So this is how the work schedule looks like. And based on this, I can either go ahead and create more such work templates. So if I go to calendar templates, as I mentioned, at some places it is mentioned as calendar templates. But if you look in the default solution, you will find that work hour templates is listed. So this is the same entity. Um, so whenever there are some, so yeah, I can go ahead and create calendar templates. And whenever I try to create a calendar template, I can select that if there is any existing resource already whom I can mimic to create a new work hour template, which I can use in projects, etc., or set calendar for other resources, right? So that's not I'm going to do right now. So and again, going back to my resource, my bookable resource. So my type was, sorry, my type was user, and this was the this is the bookable resource. Now this bookable resource will be included at several places in the schedule board, which I'll show further. Also in the project under project team member, and where the bookable resource is tied to while making time entries as well, since I'm the logged in user and so on. Okay. Um, Next, I'll go back. So when the bookable resource You are setting up the bookable resources. Of course, you want to set its skills and the resource role, right? So if I go to the scheduling part, yeah, of course, again, I said, as you know, you would see organization unit tagged at several places. Um, it will appear here. But in this section in project service, I can add different skills. Not necessarily you should have skills right away added to all the bookable resources if you're not going to filter down resources further down to schedule them. But if you have a lot of organization where you want to pick users based on their skill set or what expertise they have, you can start entering bookable resource characteristics. So I didn't list this entity is because it's not necessary that you have to add these skills every time you get started. But of course, you can refine your implementation and continue to add resource skills. Same is for roles as well. So the roles are the ones which I can create from what type of category it is. And there are some existing resource categories as well. Let's say like a developer. So I'm adding that role to this bookable resource. Meaning, if I'm using on my schedule board, if I want to filter something, I want to look at what roles does this bookable resource play. I can list several different roles so that whenever Priyesh does any type of time entries, he can select what all role he's a part of. And then you can have some more custom validation on top of that to restrict or not let the user um, you know enter some records on some other roles. So most of these are not restricted or validated right away, but again, this is something if you want to add, you can do that. So this is how you set up resources just at the configuration level. So at this point, your organization unit is set, what your currency you would be using is set, what are your roles in those price list, which I mentioned in the cost price list, because you can assume that I have already set the bill price list. So that also will be covered later. So your resources are set based on either some type of contacts or some type of system users. Those are already set. And your resources are set. And if optionally you want to add skills or resource rows, you can do that, right? So at a bare minimum, your resources and the organization units are set. Now let's see, given that your system is ready to run through the first sales cycle, now there are several common entities you already must have noticed: lead, opportunity, opportunity line. These are all the common CRM entities if you already noticed. Even quote line detail. But then you see similar sounding entities which appear new, which are quote line invoice schedule, quote line milestone, project contract. Again, in bracket it is order. So behind the scenes it is sales order entity um, and sales order line entity, but there are again new entities pertaining to project operations, that is line detail, like what happens under the contract line, what is the invoice line schedule, what is line milestone. Notice it's invoice schedule, it's a schedule here and a milestone here, it's again a schedule here and a milestone here. So that's what I'm just going to be covering in the next slide. So your sales cycle starts from the lead, goes to the opportunity. If you want, you can add some details in your opportunity line. If not, that's totally fine. You can right away go ahead and create a quote and start adding details to the quote line detail, invoice schedule and milestone. Now the number 7 and 8, invoice schedule and milestone, will appear alternatively. Why and where, I'll just show you. So, and similarly, when you proceed further after the quote, you go to the contract, that is the sales order. Once the quote is finalized, the invoice line schedule and contract line milestone, these two are used or they will appear alternatively besides on what type of line, quote line or contract line that is, right? So first, let me just show you a visual representation of that. It does look like it's quite a lot here, but let me just walk through this simple so that you can visualize it when I show you. So let's say you start from a standard lead. It doesn't have much. It's just a standard lead used out of the box. But with the context, the forms that you see in project operations app are, they will run in context of the project operations app, right? So if I have to just go back and go to the sales area, and if I go to leads, now I had qualified a lead earlier for the sake of this demo. So I'll open all leads. and I'll open the one that says Earthline cable. So this is one lead. So the lead is largely the same entity. It doesn't have much of the details. Um, what I have done here is I have added selected here work based. So in project operations, whenever you select the type of the sales record as work based, it means it implies that it is a project operations related lead opportunity quote and so on, right? So selecting that, I proceed further to develop. I qualify the lead and it creates an opportunity, of course, and the opportunity has opportunity lines. So if I go back to my slide, here we are. I've qualified the lead, its opportunity, and it has opportunity lines. Um, and it doesn't have any other further details, right? So if I, it's a write-in product, it's a billing method. So I'll talk about what the billing method is. You see, I've not added much information here to keep it simple, but this is something to note. Billing method is time and material and fixed price. Either you can start enriching your opportunity in the opportunity line stage, or you can leave it right here. And whenever you create your first code, you can enrich the code lines by adding the billing method to it. So for whoever is new to project operations or project service automation for that matter, time and material, meaning in your project, if your resources are going to enter time, and if that is supposed to be considered in billing the invoice to the customer, time and materials should be used. If your opportunity line or your quote line is using a time and material line, the project that will further be tied to it, and if the users enter time on that, that time will be considered in a part of the invoice. If I, let's say, if for any other opportunity, I don't have a time and material, and I just use a fixed price, meaning time time will not be included even though users enter some time. But what will happen is a fixed amount of the cost will be added to the invoice. So I'll get to the invoicing piece and I'll talk about how time entries are considered and not considered. It doesn't mean that time and material and fixed price lines can't be used in a single opportunity or a quote. They both can be used and can be tied to the same project as well. But let me just take an example of time and material so that I can talk a little bit more about time entries and how they turn into actuals and end up in the invoice. Okay. So if I go back, so I just added one opportunity line and that's it. I left it there. Then I went ahead and created a code for myself from this opportunity. So if I open this code, now in the code, again, there are some standard fields. There are some new fields which are related to project operations Lite, especially, or project operations for that matter. That is not to exceed limit or there's one more inside, which was not existing previously in project service automation, but it is. So not to this is just a limit that you can put on the code that the billing that should not exceed a certain amount. So anyways, so if I have to go back to my slide, uh, remember we stopped here and we came to the quote and we now have a quote line. So this quote line actually flew in again from the opportunity line. So whatever I had created on the opportunity, and when I created a quote out of it, the same opportunity line flew in from there. And I can then open this up and start to enrich this again. So what it means is I have created a project here on the fly. I just call it as Earthline D365 project. And the billing method is now locked because I can't change it midway. Okay. Once I save the record. So time and material, meaning I am going to let users enter time on the project, which should be considered for the invoice. Now let's say if my billing method was fixed price, I would have set the time to no and I would have set the fees to yes, meaning a flat fee would have been considered. But now since I'm not including any fee to avoid any confusion, I'm selecting time as yes. This means that time entries should be accounted for, right? So now talking about entities, quote has quote line details. Again, this is optional. If you don't want to use it, that is fine. I have not used it. It means that if you want to define this quote line further, what will you be doing in D365 setup and customizations? Are you going to be setting up the environment? You're going to be doing some integration. Is there some go live? How much each of those budgets and everything are? You can add it right here. If not, if you're going to keep it light, that is fine. Hence, this lies in parallel with invoice schedule. Now I mentioned, if I have to go back to my slide, and if I go back one step, I had mentioned these three in my diagram. I've mentioned these three in parallel, meaning these three. So quote line detail is already there, but I said, if you remember, I said that how we interchangeably use invoice schedule and milestone, or how they appear, not use, how they appear is because it is based on the billing type. So remember, I selected time and material. It means an invoice schedule will be selected. Like this grid will show up behind the scenes for this time and material invoice schedule. MSDine underscore quote line invoices schedule is the name of the entity. And for quote line milestone, MSDine underscore quote line schedule of value is the um, entity name. Similarly, if you're able to foresee for the contract as well, it has the same contract line schedule of value for the fixed price one, and invoice schedule line, contract line invoice schedule, quote line invoice schedule. See how they start to make sense now? And again, contract line is parallel. If you want, if you have stuff put in there from the quote line level or directly on the contract level, you can use that. But again, you can also skip that part. So again, the reason I have invoice schedule here, I can only see invoice schedule and not quote line milestone, is because my billing method is time and material. If it had been fixed price, milestones would have appeared. So quote line milestone would have appeared. So for again, those who are wondering what is invoice schedule and what is milestone, meaning if I am letting users, if my users are supposed to enter time on this project, and that is something that I want to be included in the invoice, uh, the schedule runs off fixed dates. You can of course change this. And whenever you create an invoice from the contract, further down it will be contract, of course. So whenever you create an invoice from the contract, based on the dates, based on the transaction cutoff date, all the time entries appearing before this date will be considered to be in the invoice. If they already have been included, those will be excluded. Let's say on the 5th of December, all the time entries which were already included in the 28th November invoice run, they will be excluded. Again, this is manual. Um, so I'll show you. So this is what the schedule is, because the schedule doesn't know what amount is to be deducted, right? How much amount the invoice should be. And if I had fixed price, it meant that I know it's a milestone, right? If it's a 100K project, and if in the invoice milestone have five dates based on the billing frequency, based on the invoice frequency, it would have said that, yeah, because you are billing bi-monthly and it's a 3-month long project, so there would be like, let's say five invoices to be created. So it would have divided the 100K into five equal amounts of 20K each. So that's largely on high level. That's how milestone and invoice schedule is. Okay. Um, so these are the entities for the sales. Post this, again, the last part is again project contract. So now for project operations, people wonder, is project operations, sorry, is project contract the name of the entity? Yes, it is. It is project contract on the sitemap. But if you go into your default solution, the name of the entity is order. And again, the name behind the entity for anyone who's customizing this is sales order. So all the names from the sales entities are the same. Again, for the project contract line, the on the surface level, it is project contract line. On the UI level, in default solution, it is order line, and the name on that entity is sales order detail. Again, picking from the sales entities. Right now, you see how these entities are common between your typical sales or classic CRM and project operations. But further, since project operations didn't exist before, and the existing sales order line had to be enriched to perform the project operations functionalities. Now your entity names in the order will be order line transaction, that line detail, contract line invoice. Yeah, so this was the same. invoice line schedule, and milestone. So again, these are the new entities you will find in project operations. So usually we don't pay attention to if these entities existed in classic CRM or not, but you can start to take a note where things were common in the classic CRM and where things are new in project operations, picking from your classic CRM, right? So I was in the quote. I will go back to the quote. I'm in the line. Now from the quote, when I marked the quote as one, what it did was, of course, it created a new contract. I can either go to the contract from here, sales contracts, yeah, or I can just go to the project contract. So since this is a trial environment, I just have one, so I can just go from here. I'll open this contract. Now this is where the contract is active and it is running. Again, everything that is flowing from code that would have come up here in the contract line. You are again free to enrich this contract before you click on confirm. But I didn't do that. I just used whatever I moved forward with. Again, these are the contract line details. I don't have anything here. I'm not using these lines. And I'm using the schedule again, because the contract line is coming from quote line of type time and material. It's invoice schedule and it's not milestone, right? Um, yeah, so I was talking about the entities. Remember, it says project contracts here, but the form is order line, right? Same for the contract. It says order, right? But where you are is actually project contracts, which is a sales order, which classic CRM users would know it's a sales order, right? Um, let's say everything is in place and I can now create an invoice. But before I create an invoice, I should have done something on the project, right? I should have added some users. Users should have worked on it. Users should have entered some time. That time entries, those time entries that they do, they must be approved at some point. And hence, based on whether they should be their correct time entries or not, an approval process is in place. And if someone from the accounting team decides that yeah, these are the ones which I'm actually going to make them ready for invoice, they will select those actuals and make them ready for invoice. So all that I'm talking about right now, it might be new words. What are actuals? What are time entries? What is a project team? So that is what coming up next. So this was the sales part. And now we'll come to the project part. So in the project part, I'm only including all the high level entities, and I'll walk you through that as well. Now, if I go again back to my project area, now project is again vast. It's very vast. There are again too many entities tied to projects also. But what matters most right away is what a project is. All these important fields it has on it. But what you largely have is the project tasks as to what you want to do on the project. I have not done anything on the project task again. Um, for now, I've just kept it blank. But again, you can add your project task. You can add different buckets. So there are again a few more entities like project buckets in project operations Lite. That let's say if I open a new task, requirement gathering. Um, if I go to the board, I can create a bucket here. Is something as phase one, something as phase two. So I can move the tasks between different phases. And again, bucket is also an internal entity, but I haven't listed that in my deck. So, but what matters for new project operations Lite users is the project team. So project team, again, these tie back to the role. So project team members, the entity name here under a project are I showed you the project tasks, which are tied to the project. They have its own duration, time, and everything, cost, and project team member. So project team member is what these are, and then also talk about what actuals are. So in the project team members, meaning again, I'm creating a team member to this project. I'm adding a team member I'm selecting from the bookable resource. Remember in the organization settings, we saw Priyesh Walk was a bookable resource of type user. That person should be on this project and should have a project manager role and should have, what resourcing unit this project is in. So I've just selected all the default values. If we have to try all the combinations which are possible, it would probably not fit in this session. So I just kept on adding things just to demonstrate. Then all these are different entities, but we'll not get into those. What are assignments? What are recent? These are all different PCF controls, technically speaking, behind the scenes in project operations, which perform your allocations or your scheduling based on some uh, preset parameters. Yeah, so I talked about actuals. So what happens in a project, the most important part, if it's a time and materials type of project, what will happen is actuals will be created. Now actuals, as it implies, meaning whatever the time entry is, what should be that amount, right? If someone has entered 4 hours or 5 hours, what should that amount to based on the resource, who that resource is, or what their role is, and what is the cost or what is the bill rate, right? So if I scroll to the very right, I had made 2 time entries. That's why you are seeing these 4 actuals. I'll also show why, how these actuals came into being. Uh, so there are some costs involved here. Unbilled sales, 4 hours and 6 hours. I will get to how we got to these actuals in the next section. So yeah, so just to demonstrate what all lies under a project, important part is actuals. So, but how did the actuals got created? Again, to continue from this point, we'll go to our next point, which starts a little behind from scheduling piece. In scheduling, 3 most important entities are resource requirement, bookable resource booking header, and bookable resource booking. So I'll quickly walk through what these entities are. Again, these are their MS_underscore resource requirement, bookable resource booking header, and bookable resource booking. So whenever you create a booking, these 2 records are created alongside. But what you actually schedule is a resource requirement record. So coming back to my system, we'll get to the actuals part. I'll show you how this actuals came. So this all starts from scheduling part, or even if you don't schedule someone, that is fine. But it is ideal that we know who's supposed to work on what part of the project, and hence they make their time entries accordingly, to follow a norm, right? So so this is the schedule board. If you're already familiar with field service as well, or older project service automation, this is the schedule board. Your project is here. So this record, whatever I'm selecting here, I'm not selecting actually a project. It's actually a resource requirement record. And when I select this, and if I have a resource, I can schedule this resource. Let's say I select here, and I'm just doing equally distribute 4 hours. So that will be 2 hours each. And when I say book, bookable resource booking and bookable resource booking header and bookable resource booking, these 2 records of those entities will be created. Okay, this is on a high level. These are the main entities whose records are created. But again, in order to, how did we divide what happened? All of that resides in these entities itself. And there are several out-of-the-box Microsoft plugins for that. So that's how you schedule. Now let's coming to, again, this is scheduling is optional, but it's best practice that the resource manager, schedule users on the projects, and then they do time entries based on that, right? Now coming to time entries. Now let's say Priyesh was working on the Earthline project, and I had to make some time entries. I made some time entries here, and I think probably I also made a time entry the previous week. Okay, anyways, so I made some time entries. Again, time entries is your accountability for what you did on what project. So if I have to create a new time entry, so before I create this time entry, let me get to the point of what we are looking at. So we are here. Again, we are at time entry and billing. So I'm creating a time entry. What will happen is when I create a time entry, again, as you see, what entities are tied, it is tied to a project. If I had task, I would have had task, but again, that's optional. What role I'm playing, maybe if I'm playing a different role, I can do that. If I'm, let's say, playing a solution architect, entering time as that. If I'm entering couple of hours, let me do a backdated one. Um, thing, okay. And I'm just creating this time entry. Now what happens is, yeah. So what happens is, I have created time entry, but I need to submit this for approval. So project approval is the entity here, which is here. So if I submit this time entry, a project approvals record will be created. And whoever is the project approver on the project, now since I'm the only user, obviously it will appear for me, but we can select one of the team members as the project approver. They will see that uh, this project approval, you know, is this is pending for approval. Now again, there's a caveat here. The reason the billing type is non-chargeable is because I selected a time entry. I selected a role which is not part of the project, right? Ideally, I should have selected the role which is a part of the project out of the box. So let me make another time entry. I'll just paste the same comments and let's see if our yeah, project manager. So I'll just select this. I think this, if I can't remember, this was the reason it should be chargeable is because those should already be added to the price list. Anyway, I'll skip this part if it is not. I'll just look at the price list. So whatever role matches in the price list for the billing and the cost rates for this organization units, those time entries will be chargeable. Okay. Uh, yeah. So project manager was part of that. I had also entered rates for the project manager and hence it is chargeable. Otherwise, it would just consider as non-chargeable. Now, when I approve this, after approval, there are two things that happen. A journal line record is created, meaning again for accounting team, if they want to first review before approving any actuals as to what are the journal lines to be considered, they can look at that. But mostly on the UI level, we don't look at journal lines. What we look at are actuals. Um, so whenever I approve the record, whenever I approve such a time entry, when I click on approve, actual records are created. Actuals are created and tied under the project. So if I go to the project again, this was the project. I would have seen, I would see three more actuals created. I think so. Why? Because one would be, okay, all three were created. So two were created. So yeah, so this was the one that I just created. I guess this is the 1 hour one. Yes, this is the actual that just got created for 1 hour. And the type here is, the transaction type here is unbilled sales, meaning this is the value that should be considered in the invoice. So what is done here is you mark this in actual as ready to invoice. So when it is ready, so when it is marked as ready to invoice, you don't see anything happening here, but they're just marked as ready to invoice. If you want, you can add those views to the fields to the views and see what happened to the status. There are different fields internally to show that. So once the actuals are marked as ready to invoice, whenever we are in the contract, let me go to the contract part. Yeah. So if I have to open the contract lines, I have this schedule, right? So before running this demo, I had created one for all the time entries before 28. Uh, Automatically, this is discounted, but let me assume that it is now going to run for the transaction cutoff date for this, and whatever time entries existed before this. If I go ahead and create an invoice from the contract, all the time entries all the actuals which are marked as ready to invoice, those will be considered in the invoice. So I didn't keep in mind where I had made the time entries. But if I had made correct time entries, yes, that 1 hour, $160 worth of that 1 hour would be part of the invoice, right? So the actual which I chose to mark as ready to be invoiced, those will be considered in the invoice schedule and those will be listed under invoice, right? So the final piece for this is the time entry and billing. Again, time entry and billing, invoicing is the last part where we just look at two major entities, invoice and invoice line, right? So if you look at invoice and invoice line, the reason I say two major entities apart from several of these is because project baselines or product baselines, meaning if you're adding any licenses in the invoice or the advanced and retainers with this is the new feature in project operations Lite. It didn't exist before in Dynamics 365 PSA. So all these grids are still invoice lines. They're not different entities, so to speak. So this is your pro forma invoice. Now, because this is a project light type of deployment, um, the invoice which you end up creating in project operations light is a pro forma invoices. Now, given another condition or an extended scenario, if this was a full project operations deployment, tied to finance and operations, when you confirm an invoice or even at different stages when you mark a contract as confirmed, all those things go into finance and operations and the actual revenue or the actual taxation and all those things take place there. So I'm not a finance and operations expert, but based on what I've implemented in the past as a trial, all these can be set up using dual write orchestration. And can be connected to your finance and operations. And hence that is a full-fledged scenario. If you have, let's say, inventory, or if you have other items that go all the way from your sales cycle to invoices, pro forma invoices getting created in project operations light all the way to finance and operations. So that was the list of the entities which we talked about. Now, if you notice, all these entities are interconnected to each other. Again, you'll find, I had listed project operations under the view is not correct. I had listed project operations, sorry, actuals under projects, but it is also listed here. Why is that case? So there is, what all these are all interconnected to each other. Getting the configuration right as to which organization unit has which role, what is the cost for cost price or the sales price. Once all of those fall into place at a bare minimum level, you would be able to go all the way from sales to project management to scheduling the resources to billing. Um, and I think that was it to cover all the common business entities in Dataverse, of course, which you have if you have Power Automate and if you know how to do Canvas Power Apps, you can always build your own Canvas apps or old model driven apps to only give out or only expose the entities which matter at that point. And that's how you go about understanding how the entities are behind the scenes. Some of the names are mixed and used, and what it denotes. So I tried to cover that, and I hope this session was useful. The intent was to look at all the Dataverse entities pertaining to project operations, like type of deployment to see at a on a high level, and then you can keep consider this as the whole picture, and then start to get even deeper into project operations live. So this was just scratching the surface, but I hope anyone who has a little bit of experience in Dynamics 365 CRM and is looking to implement project operations live deployment, I hope this will kind of start giving some ideas and you'll be able to connect the dots. So I hope this session was useful, um, and that was it from my end.
Well, thank you, Priyesh. So,
Yeah.
for those who don't realize, Priyesh has just had his COVID injection, and for those people who don't really know him, he's a bit jaded, as normally he's, people probably didn't pick up on that. So I just want to thank you so much for that, Priyesh. That was a fantastic, considering you're dealing with the COVID injection right now, and you're very out.
Yeah.
That was really, really good. Priyesh, a lot of
Thank
people
you.
don't realize, because you,
Yeah.
you did go quite technical into
Yeah.
the tables and how the
Right.
Dataverse tables for project
Right.
operations light work from a
Right.
functional
Right.
perspective. I
Right.
think one thing
Mhm.
that the attendees might not be aware of is
Mhm.
the sheer amount of value that this
Mhm.
type of automation, project
Mhm.
service automation
Mhm.
provides. I mean, so could you spend maybe 1 or 2 minutes just
Sure. Yeah.
explain, because I tell you
Mhm.
right now, for those people who aren't
Mhm.
aware, this
Mhm.
solution that
Mhm.
Priyesh has just shown,
Mhm.
it's the consultancies and the partners who are really valuing a lot from this solution.
Right.
So if you could just kind of um, uh, shed some light onto
Mhm.
the value that
Right.
organizations are getting from this solution.
Sure, yes. I'll give you a couple of examples. One is, let's say, all of us who are customizers and, let's say, Microsoft partners who are professional services organizations, or even consider a construction companies, or even some CPA firms who want to run their clients' work as projects, as a project management tool. So project operations is a part of a product suite in the Dynamics 365 app space. Just like field service, project operations is where you take the managerial aspects of the project and organize projects into consumable and analyze fashion, where you can run projects, allocate resources, have their own rates, bill those to the customer, and track what's happening on a day-to-day basis. And the applications could be limitless. Even if you're a medical firm, and let's say if you're having you're having doctors that have to go to different hospitals, and you want to schedule them and you want to kind of track them and bill those hospitals, even that can be a part of the project operations. So project operations can be, so it's a platform, right? A project could be anything, people working on those and them billing their customers, and then it could apply to technically any industry. But the best example here is to consider is the a professional services firm where we work on client projects. We track all the users who will be working the project. What are they doing on a day-to-day basis? What are they entering time on? Um, when should the invoices go out? Is the project in budget or not? Is the project timeline on track or not? All these aspects are offering of a solid project management tool now, which is called as project operations. But if this just doesn't involve just the human aspect of it, but it also involves material aspect like stocked inventory, and a sales order involvement, then extension of Dynamics 365 project operations is finance and operations, which is a whole different product in the Microsoft product suite, where you can have these legal entities, these accounts, these customers, invoices, projects, contracts, go all the way to finance and operation, and then it could be realized and tracked in that accounting system there. I hope that kind of highlights, Raz, what you're asking. Um, so previously it was all just Dynamics 365 CRM, but as time evolved, these distinct products like project operations, field service, and all these came into the picture. And project operations, being an extensive application in itself, has a lot of um, capabilities. And as you can see, it also connects to project on the web, which is, again, it's a whole different topic. It would take another hour just to talk about how the integration is happening between project online, which is called as project for the web, and project operations. Um, yeah, I hope that Raz, it summarizes kind of um, what I'm trying to present today.
Yeah, exactly. So essentially, guys, what this solution is doing is it's
Right.
really automating a lot of the service delivery, and allowing service consultancies to be able to better calculate their resources for delivering projects and price it accordingly. So it's a very, very powerful solution, I have to admit, Priyesh. There's one question before you go. It's by Akhilesh, who's asking, "Hi, Priyesh. Do the journal lines mean that the ledger is being maintained on the Dataverse layer, or is it back into F&O? Or a better question would be, does project operations also have the project accounting capability in itself?" Hello, Priyesh.
Hello.
I think
Oh,
I sorry, you're on
oh,
mute there,
sorry, I was
Priyesh.
speaking on mute. I'm so sorry. So I was, yes. So to Raz, I think I heard the question. So Akhilesh, the better question is that the project operations have project accounting capability. Not in the project operations light, meaning if I think if I don't understand finance much, but if project accounting has to do all the way to F&O, then there are three types of deployment. The one that I showed today is project operations Lite, which means it resides within the Dataverse within this Dynamics 365 CRM level or Dataverse level, and it can connect to finance and operations, and then accounting can happen there. But there are two types of projects or invoices or contracts or journal lines that are sent. One is the non-stocked one. So what I demonstrated today is about just working on software, which doesn't involve physical inventory or materials. Even that can be sent over. So the three types of deployment for project operations is light. Second is non-stock or production scenario, and the other one is this the stocked or the production scenario, non-stocked resources or stocked production. So those are the two different types of deployments which involves connecting um, this to finance and operations, and based on that what all you want to send over there um, can be included. So all that is part of how you can enable dual write orchestration, syncing legal entities, customers, invoices, contracts, and all that. So I hope that answers Akhilesh your question. Thank you,
Thank you
Lynn.
there, Priyesh. So please get some rest so you recover
Yes,
from your
yes.
COVID jab.
Raj.
And we want to thank you for being able to join us
Thank
today.
you. I'm doing totally fine. It's just like, it's just like a usual day, and it's so energizing again to be back with you, Raz, on this session today. I hope this helped clarified some of your questions if people are trying to explore what project operations is and how they can readily start using it.
And just to top off that, we've got the awesome Lynn Zarwin, Power Automate Extraordinaire, who said, "Thank you,
Yes.
Priyesh. That gives me a
Thank you,
lot of
Lynn.
insight about
Yeah,
the tables behind the scenes of project operation. That's
correct.
really helpful since currently I am helping to automate some stuff in our internal projects automation systems."
Superb,
So
superb.
there you go. So there you have it. So understanding the Dataverse tables that you've explained, it's going to help
Yes.
with customizing the processes. And so fun. Thank you once
Mhm.
again, Priyesh.
Sure, sure. Thank you, Raz. Thank you everyone for listening in and joining my session. I hope this was helpful. If you ever have any questions, you can find me on Twitter. You can find me on LinkedIn. Please feel free to reach out, and I'd be more than happy to help you out.